elected in 16, no one expected to get elected. My job is to try and figure out what this means. There are a million things going on. And in the background, sort of like a hum in the distance, you start to read these stories about how General Mike Flynn, of course I knew who he was, former head of an intel agency, is actually some, bad anti-American figure, and he's going to be indicted for this, and all the drama surrounding General Flynn. And I hate to admit it, I was sympathetic, of course, but I didn't really pay a ton of attention because there were like 19 other crises simultaneously unfolding, and I just didn't pay attention. So about maybe 3 years into the first Trump administration, I started to think, what exactly happened to Mike Flynn? And what was that story that I just didn't focus on? So I called him up and I said, I would love to have dinner with you and talk. So he comes up to Maine, it was in the fall, and it was cold out, and he had dinner in my barn. It was just the two of us. And we had like this 3-hour dinner, and he explained with nobody else around, obviously no recording devices, our phones in another room, because he used to run an intel agency, he knows about that. And he tells me the story of what permanent Washington did to him in detail, in great detail. And about midway through the conversation, my back starts to hurt. And I'm like in my 50s, so your back starts to hurt, and then it really starts to hurt. So we finished the meal. He tells me this amazing story of suffering, true suffering, that I'd never heard before, and I don't think he'd ever spoken about publicly. So my mind is just thinking, I'm focused, I just cannot believe what they did to Mike Flynn. One of the most patriotic men I've ever met in my life, denounced as a traitor to his country and facing prison for crimes that he didn't commit. Of course, his real crime was knowing how the system operates, and so they had to eliminate him immediately. So I'm brooding on this as I'm going home at about 1 in the morning. I get home, my wife's asleep. I take the 4 dogs, whistle, the 4 dogs get off the bed. I'm in my boxer shorts, I take the dogs out onto the porch, they can go take a leak. I'm sitting there thinking about Mike Flynn, and all of a sudden I collapse in agony on the front porch. Turns out 2 discs in my back just collapsed. And I can't get back into the house. And it's like 23 degrees out. I'm in my boxer shorts and my dogs are looking confused. Anyway, bottom line, I wind up getting back surgery because of this. And I said to the surgeon, what exactly do you think caused this terrible injury? And he said, we don't really know, but we think sometimes it can be caused by stress. Have you had any stressful events? This is a true story. And I said, you know that I had dinner with Mike Flynn, General Flynn. And he told me what happened to him. He said, that was probably it. That's how profound the suffering was that he went through, that he and his family went through. He and his 7 siblings. But here's the headline. He never talked about it. He bore up under it manfully, as they used to say, without complaint, without self-pity, and with total faith that the sun would rise again. And of course he prevailed, and that's why we're here. And I have to say, there is no greater inspiration to me as a Christian, as an American, as a man, than to watch someone suffer under the weight of injustice with dignity. That is a quality, particularly, it's a masculine quality, just be honest, that I remember my father saying vaguely was important, but we grew up in California, and sort of keeping your feelings to yourself was not a value where I grew up at all. It was expulsive rather than retentive. But I remember thinking, it would be nice to live in a country with people like that. Because that really is the definition of valiance. Valiant behavior is self-sacrificing behavior. It's behavior that calls attention from you and directs it elsewhere onto others or ideals, the ones you're fighting for. And I just felt like Mike Flynn exemplified that to a greater extent than really almost anyone until I started hearing in great detail the true suffering of the newly elected president, which I won't get into. But let me just say, let me bottom line it for you. The more you know about what permanent Washington did to him and his family, the more shocking it is. And the most shocking part of all is that he never talks about it in public. Ever. And I had cause, and the rabbi I thought gave a great, really sort of a stirring recount of what we all saw this summer in mid-July with the president being shot in the face during a rally, one of the most famous images of the last 100 years. But I just had cause to communicate with Donald Trump that night. The night he was shot, And the main thing that I took away from that conversation was he spent not 1 second talking about himself. This is a guy they're always denouncing as a narcissist. Shut in the face. Not one word about himself. It was about how impressed he was by the courage of the crowd. And, that is consistent with the way he is. I don't care what they say about that. I don't care what they say. Just having spent a lot of time around him over the past 10 years, the caricature bears not only no resemblance to the reality, but is in fact the mirror image of it. You'll never meet a guy who talks about crowd size. That's true. But you'll never meet a guy who whines less about himself than Donald Trump. Ever. And I continue to think, and I'll admit I'm 55, so I know this is an antique view, I continue to think not whining about yourself, deciding to remain cheerful in the face of adversity, being optimistic because your worldview is rooted in the hope of a great reward at the end. All of those are deep and vital virtues. That's what leadership looks like. That's what dignity looks like. And I just admire it above all. And so the last thing I will say is that when I'm, one of the great pleasures of my life has been, just bombing around and meeting people. I've never made any important decisions. I've never had any meaningful power. I really, a lot of the time, haven't even had a real job. But the one, and I don't now, but the one great privilege of my life is I've gotten to be around a lot of people, who are considered great. I mean, my job is to interview them, and, have meals with them, and listen to them. And I've been doing it for 33 years, and over time you start to think, what is the point of this life of watching? Why am I doing this? And the answer is, of course, to learn about how to live my own life. What have we learned from this, from these amazing people I've had the privilege to meet? Not amazing decisions I've had to make. I haven't made any. Again, I've had a life of very little consequence in that way. But I've had a life of great privilege because I've been able to see things that most people don't get to see. I've gotten to see famous people in private settings. And, there's a lot to be said about famous people. There are some pretty upsetting things to be said about famous people. The whole P. Diddy thing, real. But I've come away at this point believing that the quality I admire most is the ability to turn suffering into virtue. To turn the attention from you to others and things bigger than yourself. And I want to be that man, and I'm honored to be in the company of men who are like that, Donald Trump and General Mike Flynn. So it's with that I really want to express my gratitude to them and to you. Thank you.